Welcome back everybody to another episode brought to you by Loco Gato Airsoft. Today we are finally able to field my new Wolverine Bolt installed into my VSR-10. Now, as much as I want this platform to work really well, this is going to be a no-nonsense video. I'll be completely honest on how I feel towards the Wolverine Bolt, at least how it worked for me. I'm going to definitely give you guys some really good pros and cons comparing it to just a normal spring system. So stick around and let's get to work. So it's the first few minutes of the game, get my eyes on the target, just about ready to take the shot when that's right, only minutes into the game I'm already out of CO2. Now, this would have made sense if I was making multiple shots since I filled my Wraith, but I literally chronoed this roughly 30 minutes before this exact moment and probably only took about 3 shots in total. So I knew that there must have been a leak somewhere. After realizing this, I immediately go to switch out the CO2. I literally have enemies on the other side of this hill and I have to get this problem fixed now. So I take off the QD, throw in a new CO2 cartridge, and I think everything's cherry. So let's give it another shot. Nope, still nothing. So after popping off the butt pad again and pulling the Wraith back out, I come to find out that the cartridge didn't even puncture. This tells me that the Wraith was most definitely the culprit for the leak. Interestingly enough, however, the locking nut in the actual Wraith unit was not loose. I actually had a rather tough time getting the unit separated by hand. Because of this, I assume that this was not a system malfunction, but rather how I set up the Wraith myself. Like many other Bolt users out there, I used Wolverine Airsoft's YouTube video on how to set up your Wraith CO2 adapter. Now, in their video, they described that when you first charge your Wraith system, you're then supposed to back out about 1/6 of a turn. Now, I believe that when I did this, I may have backed it out just a little too much, and I may have had a slight leak the whole time and didn't even notice. So, what I decided to do was just skip the backing out process altogether. Right here on the field, I backed out the system altogether, put in a new CO2 cartridge, turned it until I heard it puncture, and then sealed and stopped it right there. I left the system like that, and we'll see just how well it does for the rest of the game.
Nice job. Nice job, man.
Thank you.
So after my first official kill using my Bolt system, I'm very pleased with how it works and extremely pleased with how it sounds. You really cannot beat out just how quiet the system functions compared to a spring. Now, the big thing that matters to me more than looks and sound is performance. On this particular day, I decided to run my Bolt off about 175 to 180 psi. Now this is reaching the max at what Wolverine says you should be using your Bolt at. Now, because of this, I did not have awesome air efficiency. However, this was the first time I was running the system on this high of a PSI. Now because of this, I was not really sure how many shots I could assume to get, so I was really just kind of going for it.
Yeah, I got one behind that rock.
Fucking shots, dude.
After covering that same position for quite a long while now, I decided to shift my position and see just how close I could get to the enemy team. I decided to flank them from the side and see just how well this bolt would keep performing. So you guys may have not noticed it there, but right before I had to evade the enemy fire, I actually ran out of CO2. My last shot was basically the last full shot that was going to come out of the system. I averaged probably just about 30 rounds for that one CO2 cartridge. Like I said, not really good air efficiency whatsoever. I guess that kind of is what you just have to assume when running at such a higher PSI. Now here I actually do try to change out the CO2 cartridge. However, since I did not back out the Wraith that 1/6 turn earlier, I guess you cannot use the QD function of the Wraith system. I guess without backing it out that 1/6 of a turn, it's just too tight. The CO2 cartridge just cannot get all the way in there, and the cap cannot fully close. And you end up just puncturing a cartridge and wasting it all out right there. So I've decided that every time that I replace a CO2 cartridge, I'll just start from scratch. I'll completely back out the system, throw a cartridge in there, put on the end cap, and just tighten it all the way down until I end up puncturing and then sealing, and then I'll just reset the locking nut. Now I know this will be a little cumbersome, especially out in the field. It'll take up a little bit of time, but I know that it'll get me the seal that I want without having to worry about backing out the Wraith system that 1/6 turn and getting it at just the right place so that you can put in a CO2 cartridge quickly, but at the same time it doesn't leak. So, after a full game day of using the bolt system, as well as tinkering around with the bolt inside the cap box, I've been able to come to a pros and cons list when comparing the bolt system to a normal spring setup. I have narrowed down my pros and cons list to a few categories, those being reliability, efficiency, demand, and personal preference. For starters, we'll look at reliability. Now, when I first started using the Bolt system, I honestly did not think it was very reliable. After having to deal with the Wraith not only leaking, but also not allowing me to charge a new CO2, really kind of turned me off from the Bolt system. However, now that I have a new method for putting new CO2s inside of my Wraith system, I believe that it is much more reliable for me on the field. Moving on, we'll look at efficiency. Now this is where I believe the Bolt really comes to its fault. As we saw earlier, I only got about 30 shots out of the system running at about 170-175 psi. Now this can be a big deal to a lot of snipers out in the field. Of course, you can counter it by turning down your psi usage, which will then get you more shots. I have found that at about 140 to 150 psi, I can get about 70 to 80 shots out of a cartridge. Now that is not too bad to me. However, now we run into losing FPS. Basically, when using the Bolt system, you come to a compromise. You either run it at high PSI, get awesome FPS, but get fewer shots, or run it at a lower PSI, get more shots, but get a lower FPS. However, when compared to a spring setup, you can get just about as many shots as you want while achieving your field's max FPS by using whatever spring and compression setup that helps you achieve it. Now, moving on from efficiency, we look into demand. For starters, a spring setup is basically ready to go as it is. For a Bolt system, you have to make sure that your battery is charged and that you have enough CO2 for the day. However, it is widely known that HPA units have much less upkeep when compared to their AEG and their spring counterparts. Basically, as long as you're using the correct PSI as well as the correct battery for the Bolt unit, you should be much better off when it comes to internal upkeep when compared to a spring system, especially one that is pulling a really tough spring. Finally, we look at personal preference. Now, I included in a personal preference two major factors: the quietness of the Bolt system as well as the ease of bolt pull while having the Bolt system installed in your sniper rifle. First off, because the Bolt system is so much more quieter, it will allow me to cut down the distance between me and the enemy. Furthermore, the ease of bolt pull will allow me to follow up my shots much more easily. With these two factors combined, I am able to overcome the limit of shots that a single cartridge allows me, as well as the drop of FPS that I have to compromise with while running at a lower PSI. Personally, these two factors are what really sold me on the Bolt unit and are exactly why I will continue to use the Bolt system from now on.